Man finds abandoned starving dog. The vet is shocked when he sees it's not a dog. On a hot and dusty morning in a remote African village. The sun had barely risen when John set out for his usual walk. The dry, cracked earth crunched under his worn boots as he strolled along the familiar path. But something caught his eye, a small, huddled shape near the edge of the road. As he got closer, his heart sank. It was a dog, or at least that's what he thought at first. Its thin, frail body lay crumpled on the ground, barely moving. Its ribs jutted out sharply and its coat was patchy and dull. The creature's eyes, half closed, seemed to plead for help. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. John knelt down, gently placing a hand on the animal's side. It shivered at his touch, but didn't try to move away. It was so weak, so starved, that it barely had the strength to lift its head. John's mind raced as he tried to understand how this poor creature had ended up in such a state. He couldn't just leave it there. Carefully, he reached into his bag and pulled out a bit of bread he'd brought for his walk. Breaking it into small pieces, he offered it to the dog. It sniffed weakly before trying to eat, but its jaws seemed to struggle with even the small bites. The sight was too much for John. He wrapped the animal in his old blanket and lifted it into his arms. It was lighter than he'd imagined, just a bundle of skin and bones. He whispered words of comfort, hoping they might reach whatever part of the animal could still hear him. As he walked back to his home, he kept glancing down at the bundle, willing it to hang on a little longer. When he arrived home, his wife Mary gasped at the sight. She helped John lay the creature down on a soft, warm spot near their small kitchen fire. They offered it water, and to their relief, it managed a few sips. John and Mary exchanged worried looks, unsure of what else to do. But knowing that, for now, they had done the right thing. The creature lay still, its breathing shallow but steady. John couldn't shake the feeling that its story wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was just the beginning, but he could tell that this little life had a tale to tell. The next morning, John rose before dawn. The sky was still a deep shade of purple as he wrapped the weakened creature in a blanket and carried it to his old, beaten-up truck. Its body was limp in his arms, but its eyes fluttered open for a moment, looking up at him with a mix of fear and hope. John settled it gently on the passenger seat, adjusting the blanket to keep it warm against the morning chill. As the truck rumbled to life, the creature let out a faint whine. John reached over, giving it a reassuring pat, and then steered the truck onto the rough dirt road leading to town. The drive would be long, and the road was unforgiving, filled with bumps and ruts that made the truck jolt and shudder. Dust billowed up around them, turning the air thick and dry. John kept glancing sideways, watching for signs of life in the small bundle beside him. Its breathing was shallow but steady, and he held on to the small hope as the miles passed. Villages came and went, their small clusters of houses barely stirring at this early hour. But as the sun climbed higher, people began to gather along the roadside, curious about what John was carrying. He could see them whispering to each other, their expressions a mix of pity and concern. A few called out asking if the dog was all right, but John just nodded grimly and drove on, focusing on the road ahead. Through the long drive, John kept talking softly to the creature. It was a one-sided conversation, but it filled the empty, dusty air with a bit of warmth. He told it about the village, about Mary, and how they had a little garden that he hoped it might see someday, if it got better. It was a strange thing talking to the small animal, battered as it is, but it made the lonely journey feel a little less daunting. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of driving over rough terrain, the town appeared on the horizon. John felt a flicker of relief as he spotted the small white-walled building of the vet clinic. He turned into the gravel driveway, the truck creaking to a stop. For a moment, he just sat there listening to the quiet breathing of the creature beside him. Then, with a deep breath, he lifted it carefully, stepping out of the truck and walking toward the clinic doors, hoping that inside they might find some answers. Inside the clinic, the air was cool and sterile, a sharp contrast to the dusty heat outside. Dr. Evans, a gray-haired man with years of experience, took one look at the animal in John's arms and furrowed his brow. He motioned for John to follow him into the examination room. Gently, John laid the creature on the metal table, the cold surface making it shiver. Dr. Evans began his examination, his hands moving quickly but carefully over the frail body. He pressed lightly on its ribs, checked its teeth, and studied the shape of its paws. John watched, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He noticed how the vet's expression shifted from concern to confusion as he worked. Dr. Evans murmured to himself, but the words were too low for John to catch. The vet took a step back, wiping his hands on a cloth, and glanced at John with a puzzled look. He mentioned that the creature's teeth didn't look quite right for a dog, nor did the shape of its ears, but he quickly shifted focus back to its immediate needs. He reached for a bag of fluids, setting up an IV to rehydrate the animal. The vet's fingers worked swiftly, and soon the clear liquid was flowing into the creature's veins, giving it a fighting chance. John hovered nearby, feeling the tension build with each passing minute. He could hear the faint, labored breaths of the animal, and each one seemed like a small victory, a sign that it was holding on. Dr. Evans continued his checks, running his hands over the creature's bony frame, noting the injuries, the signs of prolonged starvation. The vet administered a mild sedative to ease its pain, and as the animal's eyes fluttered closed, John felt a pang in his chest. He wondered what kind of life it had known before he found it, how it had ended up alone and suffered on the dusty road. Dr. Evans stepped out to prepare some medicines, leaving John alone with his thoughts in the quiet room. When the vet returned, he had a mix of hope and uncertainty in his eyes. He said that they'd have to wait to see how the creature responded to the treatment, that it might take a few days before they knew if it would make it. But he couldn't hide his curiosity. There was something about this animal that didn't add up. As John looked at the fragile being lying on the table, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than either of them realized. Days passed, and slowly the creature began to show signs of life. At first, it managed just a few weak swallows of food, but soon it was able to lift its head and even wag its tail, a tiny flicker of motion that filled John with hope. Dr. Evans kept a close watch, adjusting the treatment and making sure the wounds were healing. Each time John visited the clinic, he brought a small treat, something to coax the animal's appetite. He'd sit by its side, talking softly, even though he wasn't sure if it understood. Yet as the creature regained strength, Dr. Evans' curiosity deepened. He spent late nights flipping through old veterinary books, his desk cluttered with notes and sketches. Something about the shape of its muzzle, the set of its eyes, it just didn't match the typical look of a dog, even a stray. He didn't share his thoughts with John yet, but his mind raced with possibilities. In the village, rumors began to spread. Neighbors would stop John as he went about his errands, asking about the strange dog he had rescued. Some warned him that wild animals sometimes wander too close to people's homes, and that he should be careful. But John brushed off their concerns, assuring them it was just a poor lost dog in need of a little kindness. Still, he couldn't help but notice how the animal seemed to react differently to certain sounds, how it would sometimes perk up its ears at the distant call of something out in the night. One evening, as John sat with the creature in the clinic, it let out a low rumbling sound. It wasn't a bark, nor was it the whimper of a dog in pain. It was a strange, haunting call that sent a shiver through him. He glanced over at Dr. Evans, who looked just as puzzled, but quickly turned his attention back to his charts. Despite the questions piling up in his mind, John focused on the small victories. The animal's coat, once matted and dull, began to regain a bit of shine. It even managed to stand on its own, wobbling at first, but with determination in its eyes. The bond between them grew stronger each day, but the mystery of what exactly this creature was loomed over their moments of quiet companionship. As it looked up at him with those curious eyes, John felt both a sense of wonder and a creeping uncertainty. What kind of life had he truly saved? And why did it feel like there was something he didn't understand? A week later, John arrived at the clinic just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty town. He found Dr. Evans waiting for him, alongside a younger vet, Dr. Patel, who had come by to lend a hand. The two doctors exchanged glances, and John sensed a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Dr. Patel asked to take another look at the animal, which now stood shakily on its feet, its eyes brighter than they'd been before. Dr. Patel crouched down, examining the creature with a practiced eye. He ran his hands along its jaw, tracing the shape of its teeth, then studied the markings on its coat, the way its body moved. He turned to Dr. Evans and spoke quietly, but John could still hear the words that made his heart skip a beat. Dr. Patel explained that what they had been nursing back to health wasn't a dog. It was, in fact, a young hyena. John's mouth went dry as the words sank in. A hyena? He could hardly believe it. He looked at the creature now standing on its own. its stance more confident, its movement more fluid. All those little oddities, the strange howl, the unfamiliar shape of its face, suddenly it made sense. He felt a rush of emotions, a mix of fear, confusion, but also a strange sense of pride. He had seen beyond the surface, had cared for this life when others might have turned away in fear. Dr. Evans and Dr. Patel explained that the hyena must have been separated from its pack, left to fend for itself. It might have wandered close to villages in search of food before collapsing from hunger and exhaustion. John listened, his mind racing. The creature that he had thought was a dog had an entirely different story, one that was wild and untamed. Despite the shock, John felt a deep sense of responsibility. He had saved this life, whatever it was, and he couldn't turn his back now. After consulting with the vets, they decided to transfer the hyena to a nearby wildlife sanctuary, where it could be cared for and eventually reintroduced into its natural habitat. On the morning of the transfer, John knelt beside the hyena one last time. It nuzzled his hand gently, as if sensing their time together was ending. He watched as the truck carrying the hyena drove off into the distance, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. He knew he had done the right thing. He had given a second chance to a life that most would have feared, and in the process, he had discovered a story he would never forget. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your idea below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.